What's going on, guys, and welcome back to this episode of Split Screen D&D, the place where we're attacking all things Dungeons & Dragons from both sides of the screen. As always, my name's Tom Quinn, resident Dungeon Master here at Modern Myth.
And I'm Josh Winans, resident player character here at Modern Myth. Well, what do you got for us today, Tom?
Well, we were running low on provisions. We were down to our last bundle of torches.
Bad news bear right here.
You know, we're an all-full caster party, and
we
decided to just crank our spell slots in that first fight with that one gnome.
Yeah, but we're 5e, so we're fine.
We could have just long rested, but we were putting on our old school big boy pants, and we fled from the dungeon. We have resupplied, and we are back now. And given the fact that I think when we had our original dungeon conversation, we both felt like there was more to be said on it. And ultimately, we really wanted to kind of, I think, twist the format a little bit because we had some interesting comments. We wanted to be able to highlight some of what you beautiful people at home were dropping down in the comments. So we are re-entering the dungeon, as it were, but we are not alone. We've got the glory of a mighty fine party standing by our side.
Yes, I printed out the comments. We're definitely going to
That's right. We are encroaching on 40. We use paper to do things still.
I like the feel of paper. But before we get into it, speaking of comments, hey, Internet. Oh, man. We just keep on growing and growing thanks to you lovely supportive people at home. Please continue to support this little lowly channel to make it to critical role status. That's our goal in the next couple months would be nice.
Yeah, we're basically there. We can
there.
see over the ridge at least.
I'm making eye contact with.
All seriousness, we have crossed the 500 subscriber mark,
amazing.
which is all you guys.
Thank you guys
That's
so much.
huge. Thank you so much, and we've got some big announcements coming down in light of that. I know.
But subscribe if you haven't subscribed. Hit that like button. Comments, obviously, they're huge. We're almost basing a whole entire episode on comments. And sharing has been such a huge way to promote the channel.
Really
if you're at your table, you're like, hey, you guys all stink. You need to listen to these Modern Myth guys. Go and share it to those guys. Perfect. But before...
Stinky tables, that's our target audience.
I'm
no,
sorry.
That's
Let's get into it. So, part 2 of our dungeon episode.
Yeah. I think there were definitely. I think there were some entire areas that needed to be given some service. But I think as we were talking about going, hey, we got to go back in the dungeon at some point. We got to do this. Again, it's and literally we could do this with every single topic we do. There's,
it's so true.
So many cool insights coming in. So I don't know how, as usual, we don't have a rhyme or reason necessarily.
We just start talking and see what happens. I'll start off if you don't mind. So I'm gonna start off with something that really spoke to me. I was like, yes, that's exactly how I like thinking of dungeons, and also some cool creative ideas came out of it. And this comes from the lovely mind of John Higgins.
Higgins is a beast.
And he got a lot of really good things. Something I loved. He said this: Zelda, Castlevania, and Metroid are teachers the student dungeon designer ignores at their peril. I was like, ooh, as a person who is classically trained in the art of Nintendo, I was like, oh, you are so right.
Yeah.
Especially Metroid and the castle, when Castle Symphony of the Night came out. Obviously, went to the castle. Why can I not remember it? Metroidvania style. Yeah. But so true, because as you explored, especially in Metroid, each region, Super Metroid especially, had its own feel. There was the lava places, and there was the lush, overgrown places, and there was the barren. And each one had its own unique thing. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's how I would want to go into a dungeon.
100%. And I think, he has already placed it on the page or on the screen for those of you, I guess, who aren't still printing things out.
What? Makes it easier.
I think that I really do think that both Castlevania and Metroid kind of are master classes in keep it simple, stupid. But they're anything but simple. But ultimately, when you consider, the the tools at their disposal for presenting these dungeons.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, a series of rooms stacked in some interesting way.
Mm-hmm.
The masterclass is really in how do you, or I should say, how are you impeded from proceeding in the dungeon, and how do you overcome that? And
That is
all
so
of that
huge.
is built in. Really, I think both solve this problem so elegantly in kind of that, really kind of thinking about the entire dungeon as one big puzzle.
Yes.
And obviously not every dungeon needs to have this identity,
Mm-hmm.
but the more I think you can impart that and simply disguise the shape of that puzzle,
Mm-hmm.
the more you as a DM are going to be rewarded by your players getting creative and thinking
Yes.
about how they're going to solve that, and the more the players are going to be rewarded by the fact that it's actually an interesting challenge to get where they need to in the dungeon, instead of just, oh, there's another room full of baddies I have to fight my way through to get there. So a killer reference, both Castlevania and Metroid.
And one last thing, because you kind of hinted at it, is something I absolutely love about especially the Metroid series, is that you'd early on you come across rooms and you could see that the power up, and you're like, I want that power up, but to get to the power up, impossible at that time.
Yes.
And only through progressing through the dungeon did you get the thing that you needed in order to reach that power up.
Yes.
That because it makes you hunger for it, makes you excited.
And that actually speaks to an aspect, I think maybe I brushed against it in our first topic, but it really
It's Tuesday.
it was Tuesday and is once again. But no, and what that ultimately comes down to is consideration of dungeon layout, and something that I have seen even from some pretty experienced DMs, and at least is worth consideration, is the notion of a branching dungeon, but also something that makes dungeons exceedingly more or increasingly more complex and more dynamic. Say, should combat break out, or should they go, we got to hightail it and get out of here, is you might have a great dungeon that is, here's your entryway, and we've got this initial fork, and then that breaks off, and that breaks off, and that, pretty soon you've got 40 potential paths,
Right.
but there's 40 linear paths through this dungeon, and kind of tying into dungeon layout. And this doesn't tie directly to kind of your example, but it does, in the sense that there should be places your players can get to where they understand that there are other routes to be explored, and that, like, hey, we've been banging our head against this door for the last half hour. Maybe it's time to explore.
Yes.
Which, again, we harped on this in the first episode. That is the bread and butter of what the dungeon really should be.
Yeah.
But that looping dynamic, having rooms, having branches within your dungeon that are loops and sub-loops, puts you in a position where, one, let's say your players are moving through that dungeon, and let's say no one is serving as a cartographer.
Right.
One, you've already created a way more dynamic dungeon, in that as they're moving through, that left is now taking them back to a room that they've been in, or a sequence of hallways that they've been in. You connect enough of these together, and if someone hasn't been keeping tabs, now you're starting to get the sense of, like, this is what it is to be lost in the dungeon.
Ooh,
But that
scary.
also serves a second purpose. Should combat breakout, should monster patrols be moving through the dungeon, is that
random encounters in a dungeon. I love that.
and that those players, as they move through, they can't go, well, we cleared that room, we cleared that room, we cleared that. It's a loop. There are loops within here. So you can't be confident that even though those rooms you moved through, that there isn't the possibility of wandering monsters, random encounters to be moving organically through that space. So I was actually kind of flabbergasted in listening back to the original episode that I didn't touch on loops, because I think it's something I actually think it's become pretty commonplace advice for DMs who are designing dungeons. But really thinking about, because I've seen some pretty complex dungeons, but when you break it down, it's a series of forks in the road, and those forks never loop back to one another. And also, this will be the last thing, and I'll stop harping on the loops thing.
Loopies.
Consider that in 3 dimensions. you've got a stairwell down.
Okay.
Well, or say an old well shaft or something like that. Players decide to climb down there. Well, what gets them back? What was the intended route down there? What was the, and so the second you start thinking about those loops and transposing that into 3 dimensions, all of a sudden now, it shouldn't just be, hey, we've cleared this floor, let's go to that one stairwell that leads down to the next floor. Like,
right.
What mad mage in their right mind laid this dungeon out such that there's always one way to get down and one way to get up? I mean, it's a death sentence with even a little bit of rain. Like, you're gonna drown down there. There's just no.
It's not realistic at all, really. No, that's a really good point.
Great comment, and also, I like I said, the comments are always so killer. I just want to take an opportunity to give a big nod in John Higgins' direction, because this is one of many comments that have helped to enlighten me. So really enjoy that.
I don't know if you want to read.
Yeah, I don't get no particular order. Go ahead and
keep going. Okay.
Yeah.
I think we both talked about this one a little bit. This is from Nate.
Big Nate. Yes.
And I like his first line. I like, everything is a dungeon. Everything is a dungeon is my mantra.
Yes.
And that got me thinking a lot. Like, no, obviously I'm not a DM. I'm a player. But
enough said. Let me go ahead and give you some insights on this.
Thanks, man. Yeah, but if you want to take the reins on this, but I could give my player perspective as well.
No, in fact, keep rolling with it. I'd love to hear your player perspective on the everything is a dungeon mantra, because I think it's a very valuable headspace to operate from.
Because a dungeon is exploring an area that you don't know what it is, and you don't know what lies behind. So if you explore, like, I don't know if he gives who gave examples, but someone's like, hey, a dungeon could be a keep. It could be a library. It could be any of these situations. And if so, the skills you learn in a dungeon are transferable as a player. So there's one, learning how to clear dungeons is learning how your DM thinks as a player. Like, we get to learn what to expect from you to certain degrees, and obviously you throw us curveballs to keep us on our toes, but we understand. So, but that can transfer to any aspect of the game, and not any. I think there are certain things, like, which if you want to talk about, like, social encounters with, like, talking to a lord or something, but
right. But I do think that very little harm would be done if you approached most of your, say, world building design, if you with the headspace of what is it that I'm doing when I'm implementing and building my dungeons, and are there aspects of that I can incorporate to this encounter? Are there aspects of that I can, worst case scenario, you go, no, it's not serving me here, but a lot more of the world at large, I think, could be thought of in dungeon terms. But something you actually said there, that you were talking about learning the way your dungeon master thinks through exploration of the dungeon. And actually, I think I don't want that to be grazed over or slept on. I think in the most pragmatic sense, your dungeon master is the architect of the world, and they might be going to great pains to go, well, way over here in the East, they had these design principles, and they had this technology when these were being made, and over here it's a more modern civilization. They might be going to great lengths to differentiate that, but fundamentally, it's one mind that is building all of this playground for you to exist in. And so definitely don't sleep on that notion of each of those corners you go around. When you're looking in those nooks and crannies, you are actively scraping the imagination of your DM. And the more you can pragmatically as a player go, I recognize this. I've seen this before. Now, we're certainly getting into interesting player versus character. As far as I'm concerned, if a player finds my poker face, they find my tell, and start exploiting it, that's good play.
Okay.
Or I should say,
or
it's bad DMing. If I've got a tell that can be exploited, it's time for me to mix my game up. But I don't. It doesn't have to live in the dungeon space. But what you said was so, I think, so important in kind of the dialogue of DM and player in any aspect of the game. that you are, I guess, both figuratively exploring this dungeon, but we'll say for the purposes of in character, literally exploring this dungeon, but you are figuratively exploring the imagination and the way in which your DM imagines things into the world. Don't let that go to waste. There's a lot of value there.
The way I think about it is like, I was trying to think of a franchise. I don't know if this is the greatest example. Take Assassin's Creed, which has like 8 games. I don't care if you played one or if you played the most recent one. The game is familiar. It takes place in different times. You have different weapons. You have different abilities. Whatever.
You have really high points you can jump off of.
And
hear the screech of an eagle, and no matter what distance, landing in hay.
And it's fine. Totally fine. And you can murder someone brutally, and as long as you hide in a haystack afterwards, no one will care. Yep, that's what
makes the game so realistic.
Anyway, but no, that idea that you learn Assassin's Creed. Now you go to different environments and all that stuff. Just kind of the same thing. I'm learning how to play DM through you, right? So it's like that kind of idea.
Yeah. Well, and I think the idea that, like I said, part of my job, I think, is to try and obscure those tells when I'm designing dungeons.
Right.
You know? But without a doubt, you sitting down with a DM that you've never played with before and running through one of their dungeons,
totally different.
That should feel like a different experience.
Yes.
And it should feel like you're in the dark. It should feel like you're feeling your way through that. So I really like that.
I can't wait till you experience me as a DM, by the way.
I'm ready. Get ready for season 2 because Josh is going to be grabbing those reins.
I don't know what I'm doing. Yeah, it's gonna be way different. But a little bit further down in Nate's comment, because we spent like not too long, just the right amount of time on his first thing. But mapping, skulking, random encounters, morale rolls, factions, etc., etc. For me as a DM, building this out helps me make this place more alive than if I had just thought of a series of goals and ran it as a skill challenge. I love that. That it brings it so much alive. And a lot of people, a lot of comments made that, like, it needs to feel alive. It needs to make logical sense.
Yeah.
That it's like, yes, random encounters in a dungeon. I know we've done it before, but that's like, that would also helps counter the sleeping problem. Like if you take a long rest, then you could be ambushed.
Certainly. Yeah. If it's a highly dangerous place, or let's say the players have been particularly noisy or stupid leading up to that rest.
We're never stupid.
There's
if you kill my character, it's your fault.
Here we go. Here we go. No, I actually think we touched on something that holds hands with this, which was ultimately kind of that same notion of building the dungeon should be an exercise in exploration first, combat second, social. You could weigh the rest of it out, but I would say exploration first. And I think all of that, or at least the vast majority of that, really ties into that. No one wants to explore. Oh, what do I go in the next room? Oh, cobwebs and a barren room. Okay, I guess I don't know. It's like if as a DM I'm not giving you things that are compelling you to explore a space, then I think the question is why not just roll an investigation check and go like, hey, you just said it's cobwebs and stones in here. Can I just make one roll and you can tell me the room's empty? It's like there should be things that draws a player's eye and they go, I want to look at that.
Yes.
I want to talk with him. I want to, something's not right here. I can sense it. I want to engage with the mystery in this space. And all of that really, I think, holds hands well with the idea that, first and foremost, this place wasn't built so that thousands of years from now, hundreds of years, whatever, adventurers could delve and find the goodies. It was built for a very specific purpose. Shout out, they were on Mythmakers, but Dungeons with Plumbing was a good publication for talking about exactly that. Really thinking about your dungeons in the pragmatic terms of when this was built, how did they move water around? Did they have ventilation for air? How did they? All of these important considerations that really the second you give them 2 seconds of thought and your dungeon pops to life. So
I like that.
Cool,
well,
cool concept. But yeah, kudos to Nate for that one. I know both of us latched onto that comment pretty early on.
Yeah. I can keep going, man. If I'm okay.
We'll just go chronologically through the comments.
I'm gonna skip one I want to talk about, but for right now, TKC. He had man. If you want just some great ideas, just read his like a 2-page thesis here.
I know he brought a beast on this one.
Yeah, he really did.
Good on you,
So
TK.
I'm only going to hit one thing that like so many good things. I totally agree with like your thing on strength and the bag of holding, how that nerfs strength. Yeah, I thought that was brilliant. But one thing is like, oh my gosh, it's he had the hulking thing following the characters like they're being chased through the dungeon. And it is a inkillable thing. It
Reminds me of Death in Gauntlet.
Yeah, Death and Gauntlet. It reminds me of again Prince of Persia, Sands of Time.
Oh, yes.
But yeah, the Death and man, how many hours did we play Gauntlet?
Too many.
Too many.
You know how many episodes of Split Screen we could have produced in that? It wouldn't have been Gauntlet.
I think it was D&D 4E at that time, so I don't know. So we would have died very quickly as a channel. Yeah. But no, I thought that, and again, if he has so many great ideas, he hits on Zelda as well. But I love that idea of a hulking figure chasing you through the dungeon.
I love it too. The first thing that I thought when I read that, and I really like the notion of movement. Let's call it forced movement through the dungeon. Something that is, one of the classic, a classic old school trap is like we've come upon the pit trap, the spikes.
Yep, and
the gelatinous cube falls out behind you, blocking your retreat. And now it's how do we get across this pit before the
I was thinking of a boulder, but that's basically
boulder,
the same
same
thing.
deal. Roll, yeah, I mean
Indiana Jones style, baby.
And I think two things go through your mind is one, it's great to be able to change the pace in the dungeon because a dungeon crawl turns into a dungeon sprint for a very short period.
That's so good.
Two is how do I communicate to my players that this is a death sentence to fight? And that's a very serious consideration. Again, I think in the old school space, so many things can be that there's already this attunement to look at that fucking thing. Yeah. Let's get out of here. 5th edition has a very different response to seeing badass, gnarly things.
We can take it.
Slow walking towards them, Michael Myers style. They kind of go like, all right, it's 4 of us and 1 of them. Like, I get that. Like, I get that the DM just spent 30 minutes laying out how deadly this thing looks, but let's take him. And so I completely agree. I love it, but it is an element that is tickling the Achilles heel. What I would refer to as the Achilles heel of many a 5e play group. Gotcha. But that's not an excuse to avoid it, DMs. That it's an opportunity to get creative in how do you communicate.
That's what I was trying to think. How can you communicate to me? Like maybe have we're fighting some badass things, and it's a play, it's a setup, and then all of a sudden the other thing comes in and wipes out the things that we were struggling with barely
as a
hardly breathing.
Killer setup. If you want to have a combat and just go like. Especially from a pacing standpoint, if you're pivoting from we've been crawling, we've been trying to be stealthy, we've been oops, we stepped on that tripwire, we set off an alarm, we just kicked a door open because we were tired of creeping, whatever it is. now we're in combat.
Right.
Cool. Like it could be kind of a dicey combat, and to have whatever it is that they're fighting be terrible, horrible things, and the reaction of those things when they see this thing come kind of lumbering in, watching the soul siphoned out of those things as their form collapses onto the ground.
Lord of the Rings, such a great example, is when the Balrog comes out in the Mines of Moria. The orcs, there's like hundreds of them, and they're like, oh, these guys are smoked. Balrog comes, and they all run away.
Yeah, it's a pretty classic setup. It's a tropic setup. In fact, in fact, you see. Castle Crashers riffed on the classic boss intro that actually is like not the boss. I mean, it's become so tropic that you can tweak it and play with it and have fun. I really do think that it's that strategy just comes down to if you were intent as a DM, and I would also say I'm not opposed to that notion, but I'm also I would also be hesitant to go into my dungeon design saying, here is a situation that is precisely this, regardless of what the players do. Like if my 5e group turns and goes, Okay.
Well, you still have to have the stat block for it. I mean,
Yeah.
if they get creative and like they come across a pit and they make, hey, well, let's lure the big bad guy through the pit. Hey, that's pretty freaking awesome.
There. I mean, there could be any number of solutions. I guess that would just piggyback on the idea that as much as I might love for that to turn into this kind of chase sequence, whether it's a full-on chase or more of just a, hey, no sleeping, no stopping,
Right.
Or if you,
always,
you
you took too long in this room. In comes the
effectively a scrolling level in any old school video game that but I don't think I would enter that going, this is what it's going to be. Players' actions be damned.
Yeah,
they're gonna run from this thing.
right.
They may have some something up there.
We're rather creative sometimes, and we bitch and moan until we get our way.
Both have been known to happen at the table.
I'll let you take this next one, sir.
Yeah, this one actually I got a great chuckle out of because Joseph Caribou and please, down in the comments, I know I've mentioned your name on the channel more than once. So if I'm botching this, I still don't know. So let me know if I am. But Joseph Caribou, really, really solid comment. A ton here that's worth checking out if you're inclined to go down and read the comments. But also good for a laugh because Joseph doesn't pull any punches in his presentation. For I mean, many of his comments, which always I get at least a grin, if not a full-blown laugh out of. This is cutting in. We're going to jump around here a little bit, but kind of pivoting off of some of what have become, I think, dungeon design tropes in the 5e space, and even broadly considered good dungeon design tropes. I think he takes a bit of a stand against that, and he's talking about the 5-room dungeon, saying 5-room dungeon. 5-room dungeon solves the DM problem. Let me start that again.
Reading is hard, ladies and gentlemen.
Reading is tough. Running the game, not so tough. Reading, tough. 5-room dungeons solve the DM problem of, in quotes, my players can't be bothered to pay attention to where they are going and don't actually want to play an adventure game. That was the first one. And I actually I responded to that exact point in his comment because it struck me so... I mean, it slapped me across the face. And this is the beauty of not pulling your punches. Sometimes you need to get slapped in the face because I don't know that I've ever put it to quite those terms, but I think he is absolutely right. And the dungeon is a place that exemplifies this. And something we did harp on in the first episode a lot, or I should say, at least I was harping on. I kicked that horse a few times. Was the minutia, the bean counting, the management of important things relative to a dungeon. And I think this comment really does sum up. If you have no interest in doing those things, you have no interest in playing an adventure game. Those are critical elements to an adventure game.
Yeah.
Now, you might want to play an action superhero game.
Yep.
When was the last time you watched Superman take a drink of water? Has he ever drank water? Has he ever eaten anything?
It's Superman, man. He doesn't need.
Well, exactly. And you could say that
I
about
saw
a lot of
Batman
parties.
drink
You
some
could go
water.
like, well, that's Batman. Oh wait, we've got
All right,
we've got a whole new tier to bring in. But I think every table, every DM that's listening to this, every player that's listening to this. If not the channel itself, and we'd love for you to share the channel with all your friends, but if not that, take this quote out of this comment and share it with your table and get their thoughts on it, because I think it is frighteningly true. You know, everyone who plays D&D, I think, thinks they love the adventure. They love I don't know that that's true. In fact, I'm convinced it's not true.
Yeah.
Those elements that we harped on before, and that in his comment he certainly alludes to some of those practices. I would say you can't have one without the other. I mean, they're that important,
baby. Yeah.
So he goes on to. I'm jumping into the middle of his statement here, but. Could someone just make a dungeon that will cover exactly one... This satirically, by the way, if you can't already tell. could someone just make a dungeon that will cover exactly one kitchen table so I can set the whole thing up ahead of time? No, nobody is even going to notice that the entire thing is visible, and no one is ever going to question why so many wizards conveniently laid out their dungeons in 4x6 rectangles, densely packed so there isn't a lot of wasted space in the middle of the table.
So brutal.
Again,
Oh, I love it.
very well said, and I think a pretty scathing critique of fundamentally, I think, and that fundamentally, I think what have become trappings and hallmarks of lazy dungeon design. And so much so that there are officially published dungeons that adhere to this exact thing.
Yep.
I think there's tons of advice out there that wouldn't inherently dissuade.
Encourage that thing that he's critiquing. Yes.
And so I think that I picked out mostly for that first part because I really think
That's a
there's some
heck of a
soul searching to be done there at your table is to go, are we playing an adventure game or are we playing a superhero beat 'em up? I mean, those really are two very different things. And I actually think those can be almost indistinguishable until you get to the dungeon. You know, there's no reason why bandits trying to rob you in the streets in an adventure game or a superhero beat 'em up, maybe the superhero beat 'em up, they whoop their ass a little bit harder.
Right.
But ultimately, you know, those circumstances could play out similarly.
Okay.
But crawl into a hole in the ground and one group isn't counting anything, doesn't know how they're seeing anything, doesn't know what they're eating, what they're, you know, any of this. And the other group is managing their resources, having serious conversations about, okay, what's the torch count when we decide we're turning back? What's the
How long?
That's an adventure game. That's a fundamental difference in experience. So, and yeah, there were so many comments to pull from, but we
Well, I got one more to pull from, unless you have one more.
No.
That's what I wanted to finish
We
with.
actually overlapped on a couple of yours. Otherwise, I would have been hitting on some of them. But
So, yeah.
but round us out here with another comment.
And what I love about this comment is this kind of puts things in perspective, which I absolutely love, because we have been we've been going deep and hard it's Tuesday, deep and hard into how we develop dungeons, and I love that what Kidney Thief
Hold on, I got to
made a
finish my
comment.
drink.
Okay, I'll wait. I'm a patient man.
Jesus.
So he Kidney Thief. It sounds like he's a relatively new DM, and I love how open and honest he was in communicating that he's just trying to learn. And I think this is so important as our for our hobby, is that we find these new DMs who are just trying and encourage, and it's like a little tiny flame, and we want to make a bonfire. But he had this comment to say.
Oh, that was cute.
Thanks, man.
I like that.
You're welcome. I've been feeling more of a desire to start running pre-made dungeons just so I can work on the implementation rather than creation. And I was like, you know what? There's nothing wrong with that. Building dungeons is a skill.
Yep.
And that takes time to develop. And what is wrong with, we've said this many times, find someone else who's done it before you and learn from them.
Yeah, 100%.
I think that's a great way. And also, we talked about right before filming, is there's designing a dungeon and implementing a dungeon are two different skill sets.
Very much so, yeah.
So I love that he's recognizing that, hey, I don't like this is over my head. Just trying to create everything from scratch. I can't. I'm going to make I'm going to create experience that I am not going to want to create. Instead, I'm going to find something else that I am excited to run and work on the implementing side of things rather than just creating things. I think that's just a wonderful thing.
100%. And yeah, I think, I mean, to echo your point, I think both on I think he opens his comment by saying, being a relatively new DM, my dungeons thus far have primarily been hidey holes for my campaign MacGuffins, and I think, you know, good on you. I think I think the portion of the comment that you read and it continues on to elaborate on the steps that he's laying out to kind of step his dungeon game up, and I think, as you said, the implementation versus the design. I mean, why bite that entire mouthful off all in one go? Because all of the elements of running the game, you've got tone and pacing and the mechanical back end management. And I mean, all of these things, find something, and there are amazing dungeons out there. I mean, I in general, I would probably point backwards if that's where you're looking. But honestly, I mean, I think there was actually a lot of great third-party content, whether it's for 5th edition or back.
Enjoy while it lasts, folks.
And that so I think one, acknowledging that designing a dungeon, we've kind of been living in the design space for the first episode, and actually really for the majority of this one.
Maybe. Sorry.
But I really do think that the implementation of the dungeon, I mean, in many regards, it's an exemplification of the other skills that you're using at any other point in the game. But kind of like we talked about in the first episode, I think many DMs really do want the experience of taking those first steps into the dungeon to be like no other environment that the players have been in. No other environment, that an environment that requires a different handling, even though you're still implementing all the same tools, whether you want to call it a different finesse or a, maybe you're even reaching in for brand new tools out of your tool bag. But I think that, I think being able to acknowledge that those are two very different skill sets, and going, what I want to do is really sharpen my implementation, and then I'll know what it is I love about running dungeons, what I don't like. Maybe I ran this one dungeon, this part on paper that seemed like it was going to be just monster, really fell flat, and there's a ton you can learn. It's kind of like we talked about. I'm not a big module fan. Does not mean you shouldn't read modules. Right. There's a lot to be garnered from looking at what other people are hemorrhaging onto the page. Right. And
when I do my little DM stint, I am going to take a module that already exists and I'm going to make it my own.
Yeah.
So that's
which I think is
my plan.
Hands down the best place to start. So yeah. So again, a monster list of comments. There's a laundry list of others that we could go into.
I feel bad for not mentioning every single person. I'm sorry if we didn't get to you. Please, though, continue to comment and tell us how stupid we are for not picking your particular comment. But no, thank you guys so much for that. I was hoping we could maybe even talk about mega dungeons, but I think we've run out of time, my friend. I'm sorry.
Cool. Well, I guess let's give the one shout out, because part of what inspired the Return to the Dungeon was this kind of Dungeon 23 movement.
Yeah, that's true.
And I take it, if you're catching it here, it's not the first time that you're hearing about this. But effectively, I might butcher his name. I will. You'll see the little text blurb when I actually butcher his name. I want to say it's Sean McCoy. I'm pretty sure Sean McCoy, who was is one of the co-creators of Mothership, one of my go-to sci-fi horror systems. I think is awesome. And I think he was the one who kind of postulated, this is what I'm doing with 2023. The only thing I wanted to say about it is, if you're in the 5e space, and I know that space, anything kind of within a 50-foot radius of WotC right now is a little bit on fire. WotC certainly hasn't exactly been trying to extinguish those flames as of yet. Nope. But I'll just say, the one thing I wanted to get to on the Dungeon 23 thing is, I think the mega dungeon really is the extreme, the epitome, the exemplification of all of the things that we've kind of touched on about dungeons. I would love to see the Dungeon 23 trend running in the 5th edition space, because I think there's a lot of good habits in mega dungeons.
It's a good practice, if nothing else. If nothing else, it's like Stephen King says, write every single day. It doesn't matter if you're just as long as you're writing every single day. Right. Same kind of idea.
And maybe a great, whether it's implemented or not, maybe like from Kidney Thief's perspective, maybe a great thing to participate in, simply to just keep your mind lubricated in that dungeon space.
And join a community who's also into that as well, and they're sharing ideas. And it's an organic place. I like organic.
Yep.
I got nothing, my friend.
No, I think we can wrap this one up. thank you guys for venturing back into to the dungeon with us. Can I give you a take it out? It's been a while.
Oh,
since
it's been a while since,
I've
okay.
volleyed one over your way.
All right,
Okay.
all right, let's do it.
You are running the game. You are the DM. So.
Oh, infinite power!
I know it's kind of a
just give me a second.
Jafar.
That's exactly what I was channeling
realizing.
to.
It's you got some DM in you. I can sense it.
Yeah.
You are running the game, which means that I, for the first time in probably almost 20 years, at least 15, am a lowly PC.
Mm-hmm.
I've taken my first few steps into the darkness of that dungeon. I'm greeted by a voice that sets the tone for the entire dungeon.
All right.
The world is yours, sir. What is it that I hear?
Oh, some new travelers have we. Oh, brave, I'm sure, strong, no doubt. But here lie monsters. But if you live, also treasure. Beware those that lie in the dark. The world is yours.